Very exciting to be here. I want to echo everything that's been said about the festival so far. Everybody's been great. I love Arkansas. It's one of my favorite states. I have spoken in a lot of places over the last 3 years. My first book came out about 3.5 years ago, and I have spoken in a synagogue. I have spoken in a nursing home, in many libraries. I've spoken in a casino. I've spoken at the Grand Ole Opry, but I have never spoken at a chapel. I'm not going to read from The World's Largest Man, which is one of the greatest books ever written. I'll be reading from that tonight. Today I want to read a story that I've never read in public before. Like Angela, I want to see what you guys think about this. This seems very relevant to where you guys are in your own stories and in your own journeys. When I was younger, I had 2 dreams. One of those dreams was to be a preacher. I wanted to preach because I love public speaking and because I love memorization. And I also, because I grew up in the Church of Christ, which taught that baptism was the only way to get into heaven, but that it was also good to have a lot of extracurricular activities on your application, such as being a missionary or being persecuted. The ideal scenario would be if you could somehow arrange being martyred, preferably on a mission trip, while you were baptizing many natives who were also martyred, but not before all of you had been persecuted for a few days. But mission trips were expensive and martyrdom seemed like a lot of work, and so our best option for getting into heaven was just plain old persecution. But that too was nearly impossible because I grew up in Mississippi, where Christianity was less a religion than a weather system, something everybody lived inside, a condition of the atmosphere, like having the paper industry in your town, which makes the town smell like baby feces, but which the nose soon forgets because the industry is probably good for the town, like Christianity, which is also good for the town and which only smells like baby feces to people from out of town. In Mississippi, Christians were everywhere, and it's still that way. It's not like in Portland or Philadelphia where the Christians all have tattoos of Jesus and work at soup kitchens and give back rubs to the homeless. Down here, all those jobs are already taken, so Christians have to do other things with their time like needlepoint or racketeering. Or in my case, preaching. Jesus would love that, I thought. My other dream was to be an actor. I had done a few plays in college and wasn't terrible at it, and I still loved public speaking and memorization, and also I had left the Church of Christ, which had great music and pretty girls, and hitched a ride with the Presbyterians, who had terrible music and homeschooled girls. It made them seem exotic. Most exotically, they preached a radical doctrine that said nothing you could do to get you into heaven, and they told jokes such as this one. What did the Baptist say to the Presbyterian in the liquor store? Answer, nothing. How could you not love these Calvinist weirdos? According to them, there was nothing I could do to get into heaven. Martyrdom wouldn't do it. Persecution wouldn't do it. Being a preacher definitely wouldn't do it. People are stupid and inclined toward evil, they said, but God doesn't mind since you can't help it. That was great, but how would I know what to do with my life? Whatever you're good at, they said. I had reservations about preaching as I knew it would require many sacrifices, such as the excessive wearing of neckties, and I had recently become enmeshed in a love triangle with beer and cigarettes. And I had not yet heard of a church where they would let you smoke and drink while you were preaching, despite the fact that Jesus clearly did not care, so I decided to consider other options. According to Presbyterian logic, I could be a genocidal maniac and get into heaven, which sounded great. Or I could be an actor, which isn't much different than being a genocidal maniac, especially if you like doing musicals. What should I do with my life? I prayed to God once I knew I could be anything. Blah, 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 God said, which sounded like, go be an actor. I thought about this. There were many benefits to being an actor, especially a Christian actor, which could mean being persecuted by all the pagans in the professional theater community, which sounded very exciting. They would make me work on Sundays, probably. And they would make me be in vulgar, tasteless plays like Oklahoma. It was my calling. And so a few weeks before graduation, I traveled to a large conference in Miami to audition for summer stock theater, and nobody hired me, and I was sad. So I went home. There was one more possibility, a little theater in Mississippi where they actually paid the actors. They did serious theater, some of the best plays ever written. What sorts of plays, my mother asked. The House at Pooh Corner, I said. I'd been told this by their director, who explained that they hire interns to travel the state performing this play in elementary school cafeterias. Can I audition? I asked on the phone. We saw you already. Where? I said. Miami. They had been in Miami. They had seen me. They had no interest. So I talked to God again. I thought you said be an actor, Lord. And God said, blah, 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 which sounded like ha, ha, ha. Have you thought about a drama ministry, a classmate asked a few weeks before graduation after the pagans had rejected me. Many of my classmates seemed desirous to go into the ministry, playing music in a church or making art for a church or doing ballet in a church. I had never heard of doing theater in a church. It sounded like it could lead to all sorts of dangerous heresies like applause or having emotions. There seemed to be much simpler ways of talking about Jesus than miming. And then I met Scott. We don't mime, Scott said at dinner. He was the friend of a friend, the co-founder of what he called a vaguely Baptist theater ministry in Alabama. Many Christians did this, putting nouns in front of the word ministry and making it a thing. Theater ministry, yoga ministry, ninja ministry. I didn't like it, but Scott seemed intelligent. He looked normal. We shared a pitcher of beer, and the pitcher was empty, and he didn't seem to be not drinking it. Maybe this theater ministry wasn't so bad. We write our own material, he said, and we don't do skits. Good, I said. What do you do? Sketches, he said. Sounded like a trap. He went on, talking about their national tour, their budget, their benefits. Benefits, I said? Housing, he said, and health insurance. This seemed insane. You could get a place to live and a salary and free travel around the country just to make art. What's it called? All things to all people, he said. He explained how they'd gotten this name from a verse in the Bible where Paul explains that unto the Jews I became a Jew that I might gain the Jews. To the weak he became weak, to the lawless, lawless, to the people who had no gift for coming up with names for things. He apparently became somebody who had no gift for coming up with names for things. You should audition, Scott said. Maybe, I said. Across the South, it was not unusual to see signs advertising karate for Jesus, or I am the potter and ye are the clay ceramic studio for Christ, which always upset me. Do your karate, sure, but leave Jesus out of it, man. I like theater and I like church, but just because you like two things didn't mean you had to combine them. I also like cigarettes and elderly people with emphysema, but I didn't think they should be in the same room. But health and insurance were good things to combine, as were free and housing. For my audition, I recited a monologue from A Midsummer Night's Dream when Bottom awakens and recalls having been turned into a half mule, half man, wondering, did any of it actually happen? I have had a most rare dream. I have had a vision past the wit of man to say what dream it was. The other actors would probably be reciting the Lord's Prayer, I figured, or would be performing with hand puppets. Several others auditioned first. In addition to their monologues, each of them had songs. I hadn't brought any songs, so at the last minute, I decided to do something extra special with my monologue. I wouldn't simply recite it, I would recite it very loudly. So I did it very loudly. And when it was over, they said thank you, and I was finished. I drove back to Mississippi feeling worried. I had been too loud. At one point, it seemed like I had been doing nothing but screaming. They might think something was wrong with my hearing. A month later, they called. I was hired. When my contract arrived in the mail, it seemed like too much money. The local playhouse was paying its interns minimum wage to die of heat stroke while dressed in Tigger and Pooh bodysuits, while I would be earning 3 times that and living in a lush new apartment where the drama ministry would also pay for water, electricity, gas, and everything, it seemed, but my sins. You're going to work for Baptists? My Presbyterian friends said. They're cool, I said, and they looked at me funny. You're going to work for Baptists, my pagan friends said. They're all right, I said, and they looked at me funny too. I laughed. Oh, these Baptists got a bad rap. I studied the materials they had mailed. The ministry was far more than drama. I'd be touring the nation with a whole righteous caravan of sanctified art, including music, though they did not call it music, they called it worship, as in the worship was so good that one of our amplifiers exploded. This was not the sort of music I was used to in religious settings. I preferred hymns written for the slide guitar or the organ, but not necessarily a 5-piece band fronted by something called a worship leader, as in our worship leader wears a microphone on his head. Also, these worship leaders performed for large audiences of youth who all seemed to be singing with their hands in the air. Strange. This was not the way of Presbyterians, who generally only put their hands in the air when they are getting arrested. I arrived on the Sunday after Thanksgiving, the sun cutting across the landscape, fiery and cold, a jewel in a mirrored glass case at the end of a long and polished hallway. My station wagon was filled with books and clothes and 3 cartons of cigarettes and framed photographs of my friends and family. As I approached the apartment door with my duffel, I reviewed everything I knew about my new roommate, an actor named Bart, which is not his real name. Bart, they said, had studied at the American Music and Dramatic Arts Academy in New York. Bart was going to teach me everything he knew. We would probably be rivals and then great friends, and I would have to thank him in my Tony Award speech. Bart, I would say, lifting the trophy, thank you for believing in me. I knocked the door. Hello. Bart looked older than I'd expected, husky and balding, more like a high school football coach than an actor, which I liked because I was also husky and balding, so we had a lot in common already. Was our husky baldness a coincidence? Would we be developing an original show about the spiritual journeys of great husky bald men from the Bible? Yeah, hi, Bart said, returning to his place on the couch with a pronounced limp. I noted that he was missing one of his legs, in its place a prosthetic. I sat down in the living room, tried to make conversation with my new friend and mentor, but he seemed uninterested, so instead I chose to stare at his plastic leg. Acting seemed like a courageous career choice for a man missing an important body part. And then I felt bad for thinking that. I'm going to bed, Bart said, and went to bed. I will too, I said. We would be sharing a bedroom. I disrobed, lay down, while he sat on the edge of his bed and removed his leg, dropping it on the carpet like a heavy old Russian boot. It was a little dirty, I thought. A little like maybe it had been stolen off a mannequin at Sears. And I felt bad for thinking that, too. Good night, I said, tumbling into a dry and hateful sleep. Tomorrow would be my first day as a professional actor. Dreams were coming true. The quality of my sleep did not offend me. It was just my old life, I reasoned, saying goodbye, falling off like an old leg. The next morning, I was up first. I showered. Showers always put me in a good mood, as did smoking, which I did after my shower on the balcony. We had a balcony. I had never lived anywhere with such a nice balcony. I had never lived anywhere with such new furniture. I had never lived anywhere with a man with one leg who seemed angry all the time. Bart and I were going to ride together. I looked at my watch, then toward the bedroom where he was making a lot of noise, slamming drawers. Finally, he was ready. We need to talk, he said, which seemed like a pretty heavy way to begin a conversation with a new friend. What did you do in the shower? What was he talking about? Had I done something wrong? I took a shower, I said. I got myself wet, and then I put soap on my body, and then I washed it off. Is that what you mean? And, he said, and I explained that I had turned the water off and got my towel and touched the towel to my skin in the normal manner of my people, and then I put my clothes on, and then I was going to put my clothes on first and dry off, but then it seemed like it'd be hard to dry my skin if there was something between it and the towel, such as my clothes. I waited for Bart to laugh, but whatever had taken his leg had also claimed his ability to feel joy. The bath mat was completely soaked, man, he said. Soaked? I had to change my socks, he said. I'm sorry. I could have slipped, he said. I could have been really hurt. I could have beaten you to death in the night with your own leg. I thought, but did not say. Instead, I apologized. He seemed pretty dramatic, which I guess was a good thing for an actor to seem. Bart drove, and he drove very fast through the cool, overcast streets of the city, running stop signs and breaking traffic laws, and I had to pray to Jesus to keep me from making a joke about a lead foot. Soon we arrived at a large warehouse, a few offices, scenery, and light rigs leaning against walls. Everybody seemed nice enough. Scott was there, and Travis, the artistic director, who explained that what our first show would be about. Stephen, he said. The martyr, I said. That sounded good. Sketches and monologues about a martyr and his violent death had potential. Step aside, Pooh Corner. We also met Randy, the executive director of the parent ministry, which was called Student Life. Randy seemed very important and powerful, which you could tell by the strength and size of his goatee. After meeting everybody, we just sort of sat around. I wanted to smoke, but I felt I should wait. Growing up in Mississippi, you learn a few things about Baptists, such as they can be weird about smoking. The body is God's temple is a thing you will hear them say about cigarettes, suggesting that one does not smoke in God's temple because, as it explains in 1 Peter 3:12, God has asthma. To them, at least the ones I grew up with, smoking in public was fundamentally no different than having a tattoo of a baby skull on your face. What would my new Christian theater friends do if I stepped outside for a cigarette? Would one of them join me? Would the thin membrane of our whitewashed politeness burst in the congeniality of tobacco and liberty, revealing a richer honesty underneath? Or would they assume I enjoy listening to Stairway to Heaven backwards? It was all so silly. We were adults. We were artists. I pulled out my cigarettes. Anybody want to go outside? I said. Why? One of them said. Something about the why concerned me, as though we were a small colony on Mars and outside was a toxic atmosphere burning with nefarious gases. I put my smokes away. For fresh air, I said. I could use some fresh air, a girl said. So this girl and I went outside and stood there and breathed for a while. Isn't the Lord's creation awesome? She said. It is, I said, wishing God had created a cigarette in my face. After a few minutes of breathing in silence, we went back inside and learned that we'd all been invited to a play that night at a local university. We went to the play and it was fine, and we went out to dinner and it was fine, and we sat in the smoking section and it was fine, and I smoked a cigarette after dinner in front of everybody and it was totally fine. The next day, it was not. We sat in the warehouse for at least an hour, maybe two, when my boss came out looking pale. Harrison, could you come with me? He led me to an office where Randy sat behind a desk. Please have a seat, Randy said. He spoke first, declaring grand propositions about the gospel and the ministry and a forest of familiar tropes about Christ crucified and God's temple and all that. I knew where this was going. Randy was going to end his speech with a final pronouncement about how my parents had been found murdered. While he was still speaking, I did my best to come to terms with this news and what it would mean for my life and how difficult it would be having to sell all my father's rifles and my mother's skillets, but also how the experience of loss might deepen my art, and then I judged myself for such loathsome thoughts, and then I judged myself for judging. I shouldn't have done that. And having sensed what felt like genuine contrition, it seemed prudent to offer myself forgiveness and absolution, which I did. At which point I brought my attention back to Randy and his words, some of which included restaurant and cigarette and stumbling block. Wait, what? I said. My head reeled, bounced, full of helium and ignoble gases, punctured by the vaguest words, a flaccid and dying party balloon floating down to the hard and unforgiving floor. We're making you a very generous offer, he said. What? Offer? I was still a little confused and turned to Travis, who stared at the floor like a man who'd just been asked to shoot his own dog. And finally, I understood that I was the dog. The discussion that followed was painful and unsurprising. I knew the fundamentalist position. As St. Paul said to the church at Corinth, ye shall neither drink nor curse nor smoke nor go with girls who do. The company was an interdenominational organization, though, that hired me and knew I was Presbyterian. And I was pretty sure one of their co-founders had shared a pitcher of beer with me. There had been no creeds to sign, nothing in my contract about alcohol or tobacco or even goatees. But we're working with youth groups, Randy said. Great, I said. And it doesn't look good, Randy said. You know, smoking, drinking. Is this about the beer I ordered? That too, he said. A beer, I said. One beer. One is all it takes, he said. For what? We don't need to be out at bars. It was an O'Charlie's, I said. I cited the miracle at Cana where Jesus turned water into wine. I'm sure people were drinking the wine, I said. I'm sure people were not just marveling at the wine and staring as federal agents poured out the wine. But Randy was unmoved. Children don't need that temptation, he said. The temptation to feel happiness, I said. What about fried chicken? Is it wrong for the fatter children to see us eating it? I don't know, I said. I saw some pretty fat children in the brochures. I was not going to win this fight, I knew. Jesus could be tending bar at O'Charlie's, and people like Randy would pray for Jesus to turn his life around. Just tell me, I said, is it wrong what I did? Are you saying it's a sin? No, he said. Is it wrong to break the law? Yes, he said. Because I've seen one of your employees break the law in the last 2 days. I said, who? I'm not going to say, I said, but one of his legs hasn't been seen in many years. I explained that Bart was a reckless driver, a runner of stop signs, a changer of lanes without being a user of blinkers. Those all seem like laws to me, I said, and laws seem very important to you, Rusty. My name is Randy, he said, and pushed a letter of resignation across his desk. I don't want to resign, I said. I want to be an actor. I wanted to stay to prove them wrong, to show them that camel lights and the light of the world could coexist in this place. I liked my apartment, I liked my balcony, I liked my health insurance, which I needed because of the camel lights. And then I studied the letter of resignation, including the rather large numerical figure at the bottom. They wanted to buy me. That's a lot of money, Randy said. I felt like a piece of meat, like a piece of very expensive and delicious meat. I wanted to pray that Jesus would cause Randy's goatee to ignite on fire and melt his face, but I knew I was wrong to hate, and there was probably some clause in the document that stipulated I was not allowed to burn anybody for fear that young people might see it and think we were smoking. I drove around the tired old city feeling the groaning of creation, and I thought about persecution, about the burning churches of Zanzibar and the exploded hospitals of Jakarta and the labor camps of China. I thought about how in England they'd burned and strangled the first man to translate the Bible into, of all things, English, and how later they read his work and liked it. I thought about Martin Luther and the Diet of Worms and how the Pope tried to kill him, and I thought about the guy who tried to kill the Pope, and I thought about the man who tried to kill Reagan and the man who did kill John Lennon, and all the people who'd been persecuted or martyred because they did something somebody else didn't like, and I thought about how my young and unformed career as an artist was being murdered over a beer and a cigarette at an O'Charlie's. I wandered the streets of Birmingham, a beautiful city really. The tinsel of civic wreaths hung about the street lights with care. And I found a payphone. I called a man. We talked. I was confused. What should I do? The next day, I took the money and fled like baby Jesus to Egypt. A day later, I made a call. I still remember the phone number of the pagan theater in town, rife with witchcraft and animal sacrifice, which had rejected me totally only months before. I'll do anything, I said to the man on the phone. Anything? Anything. And they hired me. I just called them up in the saddest week of my life, and they hired me. The pagans hired me. It was a kind of salvation. I worked at that theater for 4 years, and I wish I could tell you everything I did there, the walls I painted, and the shows I did, and the plays I wrote there, but this is not that story, because that is a happy story. But I can tell you about my first day when my new boss showed me around the green room, the booth, the costume shop, and then at the very end, outside the back door, the most special place of all. This is where we smoke, he said. I wept quietly. I didn't know it then, but they would persecute me a lot. They would make me work on Sundays sometimes, and they would make me be in vulgar, tasteless plays like adaptations of Henry James novels. And then occasionally, they did mock my ancient religion. Christianity is just so silly, they said. Instead, they subscribed to much more believable ideas such as reincarnation and the power of crystals, which was fine. It was fine. It made for rich conversation. In my new life with the pagans, they talked about all sorts of terrible things. I was sexually abused, one might say. My mom's in jail for selling crank, another might say. Well, I said, I once worked in a Christian drama ministry. And they gasped, no way. What's so remarkable to me about it, lo, these many years later, is how unremarkable it is that men will behave according to their nature, which is stupid and inclined toward evil. This is one of the great themes of the Bible, that people are often stupid and evil, including the people who think it is their job to not be stupid and evil, which is why we need Jesus, who said, come to me, all ye who are stupid and evil, and I will help you stop. And so the lesson is not to try to not be stupid and evil, because you will be anyway. And neither is the lesson to be stupid and evil on purpose, because that's even stupider and eviler. I still wonder, what had God been trying to show me through this exercise? This making and then dashing of what I thought was to be my dream. I'd read the book of Job enough to know what I might never know. Maybe he was trying to teach me something about dogma, to show me what happens when you take ideas more seriously than people, which would be a valuable lesson in the years ahead in many of our nation's great universities where I would eventually find a home. Or maybe he was just trying to show me that people who are missing an important body part are often in a bad mood. When I tell this story to my friends, they just wag their heads. It's so predictable. Christians are so judgmental, they say. And I'm like, I know. And they're like, no, really? And I'm like, no, I know. And they're like, didn't Jesus love the prostitutes? And I'm like, who doesn't love prostitutes? You must hate Christians now, they say. But I didn't, and I don't. They were trying. They meant well. They gave me a lot of money. They made my dream come true, if but for a moment. A dream past the wit of man to say what dream it was. Thank you.